Welcome. Let's continue. Welcome to this special meeting of Cromar Community Council, which is being held to discuss the R100 programme. And it's not at all my baby, this one. Dave Ellis has, in stalwart fashion, organised it, and he is in control of this meeting. He is our host. So you can be certain that if we blether too long, he'll mute us, and we'll just see how it all goes. We're going to start the agenda, as it were, with an overview of the R100 programme by Duncan Nisbet. And Duncan, you're the stakeholder director of the R100 programme for the Scottish Government. And thank you very much for joining us on this. And I gather, everyone, just before you launch forth, Duncan, that you've got a rather bad cold. So everybody should be merciful when asking questions.
I do indeed, so apologies if I have a sneezing fit partway through the presentation. I do have a few slides as well that I've put together. I'm hopeful that I'll be able to share that. Oh, this is the point when I press the button and find out I've got about 300 windows open. I'll see if I can find the right one to share. And hopefully that will work.
Yes.
You can see that, okay. Great. So it's really just a few slides, really just it's a bit of an aid memoir for myself to remember what to tell you more than anything else. There's nothing particularly exciting in the slides themselves, so I'll just quickly run through them. Excuse me. So I guess just a very quick history as to what the Reaching 100% programme is and where it came from. It originated actually way back, not at the last Scottish Government elections or Scottish Parliament elections, but the one previous to that, where it was an SNP manifesto commitment. Back at that time, the UK government, so telecommunications is a reserved matter, so it sits at Westminster. So all the Canadian legislation and regulation sits with UK government. The previous programme, which was the Be UK programme, or delivered in Scotland as the DSSB programme, Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband, was delivered at that time with a UK target of 95% coverage at superfast speeds, but there was no target beyond that. So at that time, the SNP, originally through a manifesto commitment, but then it made its way through to the programme for government, had a commitment therefore that they would extend superfast broadband to 100% of premises across Scotland. That's where the programme itself came from. So the programme is there now to deliver on that policy commitment. And those that remember that time will know that the actual original policy commitment was to deliver superfast availability by the end of this year. And I'll talk in a minute as to how the policy commitment has been met, but how that we will still be building infrastructure well beyond the end of this year. So I guess I often get asked what I mean by 100%, and I do literally mean 100%. It is all properties in Scotland. So the kind of four key areas that we look at in terms of how we achieve that 100%. The biggest chunk of the 100% does of course come from commercial build. So just now we're actually just over 95% of premises now connected commercially with super fast speeds. So I spend an inordinate amount of my time with the larger operators that are delivering that commercial build. But actually, and certainly within the last couple of years, we've got a lot of small operators that are also contributing to commercial build across Scotland. And the reason I spend a lot of time with them is, for one, to make sure that they're still delivering where they said they already did deliver, that they continue to deliver to the areas that have told us they intend to deliver to, because we don't want to see anywhere miss out. But we actually work closely with them as well to try and understand if, as Scottish Government, we can potentially remove some barriers as to why they might not be building as quickly as perhaps we would like them to. A good example of that is the fibre tax relief, which we've got in place in Scotland for the next 10 years. And certainly we've got a few operators that have said they have now extended their commercial build as a direct result of the tax relief that we are providing against newly lit fibre infrastructure. Now, originally, what we tracked there was super fast coverage, and what we mean by super fast, it's 30 megabits per second. I know there's been some confusion over the years, UK government originally defined superfast as 24 megabits per second. EU defined it as 30 megabits per second, and that's the definition that we are using. But we also now track the commercial operators against gigabit capability. I'll talk in a little bit more about where UK government are going with their now gigabit programme and what that might mean in the future. So what we then done is we went for a gap-funded procurement across Scotland. We effectively split the country into 3 geographic areas. So we had 3 separate lots within that procurement. And that was really so that we could try and attract as much competition within the procurement as we could. Previous UK-wide procurements have predominantly been won by BT, and predominantly BT have been a single bidder in the majority of those procurements as well. So what we were keen to do is ensure that we did have competition in our procurements, so that even if BT did win, which they have done, all our contracts, they've done so under competition, which really pushed them as far as we possibly could, obviously, in terms of getting the best value for money for the public purse. So what we've done with those 3 geographic lots, what we didn't want to do, and you're probably aware of the fact that £600 million was the sum of money that we had to spend. We split that across the 3 geographic lots based on needs. So the North lot, which obviously you guys reside in the North lot area, got by far the most amount of money. Now, what we've done there is we also targeted that money to go to the areas that needed it the most. So we took out of scope the most urban areas. There was about 35 to 40,000 properties, which were still sub 30. There was no commercial plans for, but we took them out of scope of the main procurements because we figured that if the commercial operators do at some point go further, they're more likely to do so in urban areas than they are in the rural areas. So we took them out of scope. The other thing that we've done is, because of the discrepancy between the UK government definition of superfast and our own, we've already had a programme where we spent a lot of money to get people above 24 megabits per second. What we didn't want to do is then focus the money on getting people from above 24 to above 30. We would much rather focus the money on those that hadn't benefited from the previous programme. So again, the 24 to 30 megabits per second premises were taken out of scope. And the last thing we've done, particularly in the North lot areas, we had a number of mandated and weighted areas. So mandated areas were places where we told bidders that they had to deliver gigabit capability to. In the main, they tended to be very remote, rural and island locations, and it was all about making sure that we got fibre infrastructure out to these remote areas. And then we had weighted areas as well, which was effectively places where fibre presence wasn't brilliant, but we said to the bidders, okay, if you connect premises in these areas, you effectively get bonus points through our evaluation process, but they weren't mandated to address those areas. And I'll tell you a bit more about what the outcomes of those 3 contracts were in a minute. We never expected, obviously, that the contracts would therefore give us that 100%, mainly because of the fact we'd taken a big chunk of premises out of scope of those contracts, of course. So to sit alongside the main contracts then is the R100 Scottish Broadband voucher scheme. 2 real key elements to that. I'll give you a bit more detail on that in a minute in terms of both the interim and the main voucher schemes there. And we'll also work alongside the UK vouchers for gigabit that is now in existence. But the real kind of key in the voucher scheme was there to ensure that we could meet that policy target, which was a 30 megabits availability for everyone within the time frame. And the kind of 4th area that I get involved in a lot is, as I mentioned, UK government have, since the start of R100, come forward now with a number of different projects. The gigabit project being the main one, although there's no detail of that at this moment in time as to how it might work within Scotland. But we also work with local authorities in BDUK and other programmes, such as the local full fibre network programmes, rural gigabit connectivity programmes, and the newest one is called GigaHubs. So we work with local authorities in BDUK and there to understand where that connectivity might be going. It is focused at public sector buildings, but the hope is that by putting in more digital infrastructure, that suppliers can then utilise that infrastructure to then connect premises in the vicinity of those public sector buildings. I'll be honest, I wouldn't say that we've seen too much of that so far, but hopefully that's something that will change going forward. And we work a lot with the councils, particularly on city and region growth deals. Aberdeen City and Shire was one of the early ones, and there's been a fair bit of work done with the 2 councils in terms of digital connectivity within there, but work right across the whole country on that sort of stuff. So in terms of the contracts themselves then, As I mentioned, all 3 contracts have been awarded to BT. All 3 of them are now very much in deployment, and actually we've got live connections across all 3 contracts now. I don't think I'm really supposed to talk about the live connections we've got in North just yet, because we haven't made any public announcement on that, but we do have some live connections in there, so I don't see any reason why I shouldn't shout about it a little bit to demonstrate the kind of progress that we've got within that. Now, we did have an issue. You're probably aware that the Central and South lots were awarded back in December of 2019. At the same time, BT were also the preferred bidder for the North lot, and we anticipated awarding the contract at the same time, but we were subject to a legal challenge against the awarding of that contract. Now, as happens in these cases, it means we literally couldn't do anything other than wait for that legal process to complete before we could then move forward and award that contract, which we were able to do pretty much a year later. So it was December of last year that we were finally able to sign that contract on the North lot. The North lot, as I mentioned, it's the biggest contract in terms of value. It's also the biggest contract in terms of number of premises across the whole area, and a big chunk of that money is going on an additional 16 subsea cables, which we require obviously to reach some of these island authorities that we're working towards now as well. But the good news is they are all now in build. So in terms of where we are across the whole lot, right, I mean, these figures are slightly out of date, but it's just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale as to where we are just now. So the way it works is BT will go out and do some detailed surveys. So that's physically walking every metre of the projected fibre build to ensure it's the right equipment that they're going to put in the right places. So we've got about 20,000 premises where the surveys are complete. There's about 8,000 that are in build right now, and prior to that there's 4,000 that are already connected. That's roughly where we are. So still quite a long way to go, obviously, but certainly we've started on that. The subsea routes, they're all planned and surveyed now into detailed design with a view that we did the surveys this summer with a view to then actually deploying them next summer, because we're very much dependent on the weather for doing that. For those that recognise it, that's Fair Isle. The reason I've got that in there, it's not the most distant island that we're going to, but it's the one that's the furthest distance from land, if you like. It's about halfway between Orkney and Shetland, and we'll be connecting Fair Isle and then onto Shetland as well with subsea. The island of Unst is the most northerly island that we're going to. So that's how the build is progressing. I said I'd give you a little bit more detail about the actual voucher scheme itself then. So the main part of that is obviously the main voucher. So as I mentioned before, any property that is not scheduled for build either commercially or via the main contracts is eligible for our main voucher. So that's of up to £5,000 per property that is available within that across the suppliers. That can be either on an individual basis, or vouchers can be aggregated across communities as well. And very much we see that suppliers are looking quite a lot at the kind of aggregated model where they can, to make sure they can give a better solution in terms of what is provided there. The interim solution, so the interim voucher really is something that was put in there to make sure that we achieve the policy target. I mentioned that the target was that Superfast would be available to everyone by the end of this year. So what the interim voucher does is that's for people who are in the contract or are in a planned commercial build, but the commercial build hasn't delivered yet, but it's not expected to happen until after the end of this year. You can apply for an interim voucher. It is a much smaller value. It's up to £400 per property, and that's really there just as an interim, as the name suggests, to get you a connection up until the point that that you do get in your final connection through either the contract or commercial operators. So if you look at the main vouchers, we're delivering everything from full fibre within that, all the way right down through fixed wireless, 4G fixed wireless, with some satellite in some of the more remote areas, whereas the interim voucher tends to just give you maybe a satellite connection, a 4G connection, or if there is a fixed wireless operator that's not too far away that might be able to connect you with just a little bit of additional infrastructure, then they can connect you. But certainly the actual technical solution is different, but the policy target of the 30 megabits per second availability is effectively met. Also, since we started, UK government launched their gigabit voucher scheme. Now, what you can do is, if there's suppliers that are registered against both schemes, is we can combine the value. And the easiest way for suppliers to do that is actually to be registered through the UK scheme. And what they do is the UK government effectively adds our £5,000 as a top up. So the UK schemes is up to £1,500 for residential properties and £3,500 for SMEs. So obviously you combine the value, that's up to £6,500 or £8,500. And what we've seen from a number of operators is some good results coming through using that combined scheme in order to deliver some full fibre solutions. One of the things we need to be careful though is the eligibility criteria for the UK scheme is a bit more stringent than it is for the Scottish scheme. So on one hand, you're eligible as long as you're below 100 megabits per second, because the whole point is to get gigabit to you. So that sounds great, but the other, I suppose the yin to the yang, or is it the yang to the yin, is that if there is planned build within the area of your property, even if the build doesn't include your property, then you won't be eligible for the UK scheme. It tends to be based on postcodes. So the eligibility criteria is a bit more stringent, as I say. But where a property is eligible for both, we can combine the value of those. So the voucher scheme itself, it's been live now for just over a year. There's been a lot of improvements in the back office of how we run the scheme over the last year. We've got 62 registered suppliers at the moment. That number used to be 72 on this slide, but what we've done just in the last few weeks is we've started removing suppliers that originally registered but haven't actually been active. They haven't actually requested any vouchers or built any network. So we're starting to remove them now, because there's no point us advertising suppliers to communities if the reality is they're not actually going to build stuff. So we've got 62 active registered suppliers, is perhaps a better way to describe it. There's well over 2,000 vouchers that are in the system at the moment. So of them, there's about half of them that have already delivered, and the other half are therefore in build. The way it works is, if for the interim voucher, as a supplier has 28 days to deliver against an interim voucher once it's been agreed, but a main voucher, it's up to a year for delivery. And particularly where we're seeing full fibre deployment, that does take much longer to deploy. So that's why you're seeing that lag between the number of vouchers that have been issued against the number of vouchers that have actually been delivered to date. And to date, we've got about 600 out of those 2,000 properties that are full fibre solutions as well, which is a good result, I think. So in terms of for the community council area, then, and you may or may not recognise the house there. From the data that we've got, so we've got 857 properties within the community council area. If you've looked at the detail before, you might think that looks a little high. And the reason for that is that when we looked at properties across Scotland as a whole, what we wanted to do is not miss anywhere out. So basically anywhere from our data sources that were saying there was a property somewhere, we included it rather than not. And it means that we've kind of got a slightly artificially high number, but when we go through that detailed survey stage, when the guys are out there actually physically walking the networks, that's when they find out if buildings are perhaps now derelict, or in some cases they actually get there and there's no building there at all, for example. So it really, it's a bit of a safety net to make sure that we don't miss anywhere out. So within the community council area, there's 355 properties that are planned for full fibre as part of the main contract, and there's 84 properties that are currently eligible for a main voucher scheme. The remainder of the properties by default, therefore, according to the data that we've been supplied, suggest that they can already receive a service of at least 30 megabits per second. All scheduled for fibre build, and currently the expectation is that will be during 2026. Dave sent through some questions ahead of the meeting, which I've sent in a kind of written response to, but I can talk to some of them if you like. Across the community council area as a whole, it's actually split into 2 separate phases of the build, but both phases are expected to deliver during 2026. And in terms of the dates themselves, when it's a bit further out, we give the anticipated year we would expect the build. As we get a bit closer, we'll give you the kind of 6-month window, and then as we get a bit closer again, we'll give you the kind of quarter that we would expect that to be built, and that's all in line line with the contract and the expectations we've got in terms of BT delivering against it. So you will see a bit more granularity as we get closer to the actual build date itself. Obviously, I'm sure you've been on there for a look already. Our website contains pretty much everything you need to know on there. It includes the kind of online checker where you can look up. So that should be the same cottage that I had in the previous photo. Unless I got lost somewhere in Google Maps, of course. But you can look on there to get what the status is. So for this one, of course, it confirms that yes, it is in line for a fibre connection. It provides the date as to when it expects that to take place, and then confirms that there's eligibility at the moment for a £400 voucher as an interim. Now, it says on the website just now that that interim voucher is available up until the end of this year. Again, I think I'm not sure it's been publicly announced just yet, but we are extending, or sent a plan to extend the interim voucher for at least 3 months at the moment, so that it'll be valid up until the end of March, and that's really to allow ministers to have a think about what they want to do going forward in terms of the interim voucher. The main vouchers at the moment, there is no close date on the main vouchers. It will still continue to run alongside the main delivery, so there isn't an issue with that. The real challenge, I mean, all I really want to do here is very quickly show you just some photographs of some of the physical build we've had that's already started. The reason that I can show you these photos, or the reason I've managed to get these photos, is I can pretty much walk from my house to get to these ones. Obviously in these pandemic times, SG encourages us not to really go very far, and I didn't have to go very far for these ones. So just some of the call out in terms of how the actual build itself goes in. What Openreach will do is they'll use the existing infrastructure as far as they possibly can. So if there's underground ducts that are accessible, they'll use them. If there's no underground ducts, but there's existing pole routes, they'll use the existing pole routes, and it'll be overhead fibre. The preference in the rural areas is actually to mole plough in new duct wherever possible, but it's not always possible to do that. So this example here, you can see the existing poles in the distance there, and it's aerial fibre that we've got along these poles at this stage here. The main thing you'll see that's missing from the photograph is any properties. I think there's about 35 kilometres of cable on this route, and from this point going towards the distance, it's you've got to go about 5 kilometres before you actually get to the first property. If I turn around and look the other way, at this point the actual copper cable goes underground, and it was what's called direct bury underground, so there's no ducts. We can't put the fibre into a duct that's there. There's other services in the verge as well, which means we can't mole plough it, so you'll see some duct on the left hand side there. So that was just waiting for the excavator to come along, and then that was then manually dug to put the ducting in along this section. And then I'll jump to the next section here. So the mole plough beat me to it, unfortunately, but you can see just in the kind of foreground of the picture there, the earth before you get to the pole. So that's where the mole plough came along and put the duct directly in the ground, up as far as the pole, and then it goes overhead again at that point and follows the poles off into the distance for a few kilometres to get to properties. But the other thing I wanted to point out in this one is, as you might see there in the middle of the photograph, there's a cattle grid there, and then the road changes from tarmac to effectively like a forest road. So we're in a private estate by this point. This gives us challenges in terms of way leaves in particular, but thankfully the owner of this estate was absolutely delighted that we wanted to come and deliver fibre broadband into their properties. There's, I think it's 3 or 4 properties that are beyond this cattle grid, and as such they were very quick to actually agree all the way leaves and things, which means that we can deliver fibre into there. If, for example, we've got planned premises in there and the estate owner just refused point blank to give us way leaves into those properties, we would be forced to remove those properties from the programme, unfortunately, and they would probably end up with a satellite solution instead. We can encourage Openreach to use their code powers to effectively take the landowner to court if that is the case, but as in this case the landowner owns all the properties as well, it's unlikely that would necessarily shift the position. So that was good news. That's what a standard mole plough looks like. The big barrel on the front is effectively just the roll of ducting, and then the apparatus at the back effectively, just as the name suggests, it ploughs it straight into the verge. We can put that along the verges, particularly our single track roads. It's really important because it means that we minimise the disruption on the road network. Where the roads are really narrow and there isn't much of a verge, in a number of areas we've got some really friendly farmers that are quite happy for us to actually just put it along the edges of the fields. Some farmers are more accommodating than others, it's probably fair to say, but generally the farmers are looking for connectivity as well. So I would say that in the main, and I speak as a farmer son myself, so obviously I'm going to pick up the farmers as much as I can here. When we get into some of the nooks and crannies, we've got access to one of these little things. So this is also a mole plough, but it's a remote controlled mole plough, and it's really
Off that. Yeah. It does eventually.
Well, it doesn't. It's failed twice.
Yeah, but it does eventually, because I got there.
So yeah, that's just a little remote control one to get into kind of smaller nooks and crannies. It's particularly good, for example, if there's built cycle paths and things like that. We can put the mole plough along the side of a cycle path where you maybe wouldn't get the larger apparatus. So that was me really. More than happy to take any questions that you might have. I mentioned that Dave had sent through a list of questions, so I don't know if you want me to go through any of those specific questions or not, or if you're quite happy just for a kind of open discussion at this stage.
Well, thank you very much, Duncan, and that was very clear to me, and I have had difficulty understanding it all beforehand, so thank you very much. I wonder, I mean, there are quite a lot of questions that are being posed to Duncan by Dave on everybody's behalf. But I wonder if we might, for a minute or two, give your voice a bit of a rest, actually, given that you've got a cold. And why don't we talk to Matt Lockley and Jack Rigby from Aberdeenshire Council about what they're doing to help the rollout of the programme and where they fit in really with what Duncan and his people are doing. And when we've heard that, we'll go back to you, Duncan, if we may. We'll be slightly more in the picture. So I don't know, is it you, Matt, who's going to speak first?
Yep, that's fine, Simon. I'll go first and then hand over to Jack. Hello, everyone. My name's Matt Lockley. I'm Service Manager for Economic Development at Aberdeenshire Council. And for several years, many years now, in fact, before my time, but digital connectivity has sat with the Economic Development Service within the Council. And many of you may well know and have fond memories of one of my former colleagues, Roddy Matheson, who led a lot of work on this with a digital superfast programme previously that Duncan mentioned, DSSB. Roddy retired and we've had a bit of a gap in between times prior to recruiting Jack, and I'll explain a bit more about that shortly. But certainly from the council's perspective, obviously we invested 16 million of our own capital in the DSSB programme, one of the highest investments in the UK by a local authority in that broadband programme with the Scottish Government and BDUK. So this is a real priority for us. It remains a significant priority. Aberdeenshire still has its fair degree of challenge with relation to connectivity, particularly when you get to talking about gigabit speeds and the full fibre picture. So we're really keen to work with the government, particularly with Duncan and his team, to make sure that we maximise the benefit here in Aberdeenshire. Jack and his team, and I'll let him explain about his role and their role, but basically we secured some extra funds through the Aberdeen City Region deal to appoint a small team of colleagues who can help communities such as yourselves figure out how to get the best connectivity. Duncan mentioned things like aggregating vouchers, trying to pull communities together so that where we know that you won't benefit directly from the R100 main build, that we can work with you to aggregate demand, go to the provider and the operator networks and ask them for solutions. And so that's part of what Jack and his team will be looking to do. And we've secured funding for those posts through the City Region deal. The City Region deal also has some capital funds remaining in it for digital infrastructure. And again, part of the work we'll be doing in the next few months is looking at what that money can be utilised for, how best to utilise it and deploy it across Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, actually, because they also have still some patches of poor connectivity, but obviously they're generally much better served. So that was a very brief overview of what we're doing at the council level. I'll hand over to Jack, and he's very new in post, so be gentle with him. But Jack's been liaising with Duncan, and you know, he'll be able to give you a bit of an idea of what he sees the role of his team as. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, like Matt's introduced me, my name's Jack Rigby. So I'm not long in joining the Aberdeenshire Council as a digital stakeholder lead officer, and there'll be 2 digital engagement officers that'll be joining me next week. So they'll be brand new in post as well. And the whole aim is that what our team will be working on really quite heavily is about community engagement, just like Matt's saying, looking at making sure that the R100 scheme and the broadband voucher scheme is really utilised. You know, I've said it a few times to Matt, it's more going to be like an information and education type of aim that the team will have, really working to engage with residents, with businesses and communities to make sure that people know what the options are, know where they sit on the rollout, be the kind of local points of contact for the likes of yourselves, any other community group or any other individual resident. So when they've got a question about the rollout, about the nature of Aberdeenshire, there's a local team that can come and help, point in the right direction, answer questions, and like Matt was highlighting there, is looking at the aggregation piece to really kind of maximise what the impact of the voucher scheme can be. I'm speaking as somebody who is actually affected by this, and so it's an aim that's close to my heart. I live just outside Inch, and so it's looking at some of the local residents nearby and aggregating that voucher scheme to see what we can do to implement some better solutions. As well as that, what a significant part of my job will be is working with operators as well. You know, if you've utilised the R100 website and you can see you're eligible for a voucher, you're then given a list of operators. There's 28 that are listed in Aberdeenshire at present on the website, and I've engaged with them all at this point to try and get a really strong understanding of the technologies they offer, the solutions, what that coverage looks like for Aberdeenshire right across the board, particularly obviously for the rural areas. And the aim, the strategic kind of part of that is to be working closely with operators to try and be a bit of a middleman to give solutions to communities, but also bring communities to the operators, to really make the voucher scheme work as best for all parties. And lastly, like Matt highlighted there is some capital it's left in the City Region deal for the digital kind of work stream. So a large part of what I'll be doing long term, you know, as the R100 scheme kind of goes on, is looking at where the gaps really are, that we can really implement that cash and make the most impact on it. But yeah, that's again a quick overview of what I'll be doing and what my 2 new staff will be doing as of next week.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, Matt and Jack. We circulated, or Dave Ellis circulated an email before, quite a long time before this meeting, asking people for their questions, and he assembled them all on a fine spreadsheet and sent them to Duncan. There were questions from individuals and there were questions from the Community Council. And I think that it's obviously important to get those answered during the discussion that follows. So I think what I'd like to do is hand over to Dave. And Dave, if you could take us through some of these questions and ask you, Duncan, to answer them. And we will, because Duncan has replied in writing, we will circulate them to you afterwards. So perhaps we don't need to do them all, and some of them anyway have been answered in the various presentations. And then we'll go to any other questions and discussion that haven't been covered. Dave, can I hand over to you?
Sure. I think a good way to start then would be that was only 5 questions that came from people who registered for tonight's meeting, then 5 specific questions, which I think, Duncan, they were the ones at the end of the list that you did. Maybe it would be good in order to run over those those 5, I think, then. Do you want me to either read the question, or are you happy to handle both bits? Or
no, I'm quite happy. I've got the email that I sent to you here. So so the questions from the registered meeting participants, those ones, yeah?
yes,
Yep.
please, yes.
Yeah, so I'll just run through that. I'll just kind of refresh everyone's memory of the actual question, and then pretty much just read out the answer that I've sent on to Dave earlier tonight. So the first one was what the criteria for identifying the homes that are not eligible for the R100 interim voucher, but instead qualify for the main voucher, and what are the timescales for application and award. So I'm guessing what I read into that is it's more to do with how did we get around to selecting what was in the contract and what wasn't. I guess, as I described earlier, it was actually through a competitive procurement. And I suppose the easiest way to describe it is we, as part of the procurement process, produced a very, very large spreadsheet with all the eligible properties on it. So when you look at the properties across Scotland, there's 2.8 million in total that we were dealing with. We don't need to give the bidders all of those properties, but we give them an awful lot of them, as you can probably imagine. So a very big spreadsheet with all the properties on it that are eligible. And what we asked them to do is come back to us and confirm to us which of those properties they can connect, what they will connect them with, i.e. what will be the technology, what speeds will therefore be able to be delivered, and what are the timescales for the delivery of each of those properties. So that in effect is what we do. So we're then relying on the bidders themselves to choose which of the properties it is that they think they can therefore connect with the available funding against each of the lots within the contract. So that pretty much leaves us there, and then obviously all the properties that are left over that they're not connecting, along with those that we took out of scope by default, are then eligible for the main voucher scheme. So hopefully that answers that one. Is that okay? Yep. I'll move on to the next question, which was specifically about Logie Coldstone. Whether or not it was included, what the timescales were, any alternatives if it was excluded, and such like. What if someone wants superfast sooner than what the R100 programme can deliver, and how do community-led initiatives and things work, including technical support. So I had a look, and the vast majority, I think there's only 2 or 3 properties that aren't in scope for their full fibre connection at this stage. So those properties, obviously, they're eligible, well, they are in the main contract build, so they will therefore also be eligible for an interim voucher, as I say, through until the end of March next year, for an interim solution until such times as the main contract can get there. And those 2 or 3 properties that aren't currently in the contract are therefore eligible for the main voucher scheme. As I mentioned earlier as well, vouchers can be aggregated. A lot of it's dependent on supplier. So the voucher scheme itself is actually set up to be a supplier-driven model. So all the suppliers that are registered to be on the voucher scheme, they have access to effectively a mapping tool that we produce for them, where they can see on the map all of the properties that are eligible, but we also then allow them to download lots of information on those properties as well, so they can load the eligible premises into their own planning tools, and that's what a lot of them are currently doing. But also it does allow people, either individuals, communities, or with the help of the local authority, of course, to contact suppliers directly to see what solutions might be viable for them. The next question then is what infrastructure capacity will be provided, and who will provide the actual internet services? Does the customer have a say in this, and is there an escalation process for the customer if there's promised timescales, capacity, quality are missed? So against the main contract then, it's BT won the contracts. They use their prime contractor as Openreach, and Openreach actually deliver most of the commercial broadband anyway. So they are building the network with their own subcontractors to help do the physical build within that. But the way that Openreach work is they don't directly sell services to customers. What they do is they sell what's called wholesale services to retail service providers and internet service providers. And in turn, then generally members of the public will go through their ISPs to order a service. So Openreach are regulated by Ofcom. The good part of that is that they've actually got hundreds of ISPs and RSPs, so you'll still be able to buy a service. Yes, you can buy it from BT, but you can buy it instead from likes of Sky, TalkTalk, there's a whole myriad of different suppliers that are out there now that will be able to effectively deliver service via the Openreach network. There will be a range of packages available from them, everything from your basic 30 meg connection right up to gigabit packages, because of the fact that it's a gigabit capable network. Obviously the prices will increase depending on which package that you might choose, and I would always suggest that people shop around, because there's always different offers from different suppliers as to what you might be able to get on the market. It's quite a buoyant market within the UK in terms of supply. So until such times as the services are commissioned, it's our own Scottish Government internal team that manage the contract with Openreach to make sure that that's delivered on time. But once it has been commissioned, at that point it's down to then buying your service from your ISP, and if there's an issue with the service after that point, then it's the customer would raise those issues via the ISP to try and get resolution. We have got built into the contract itself a retention period, which means that once BT effectively tell us that they've connected up lots of properties, because in effect they don't get paid until they've actually connected properties, so we'll hold back some of the payment for them, and that's to allow for a period of time where if we tell everyone that there's, or people know that the connection is now available but people can't get connected, we can then go back to BT at that point and say, well, wait a minute, you've told us that these ones are ready, but we're finding there's issues, you have to get that resolved before we'll pay you the remainder of the money. But that's only there for a fixed period of time, so if the fixed period of time completes and there's been no complaints, we'll then obviously pay BT the remainder of the money that we're owed them at that time. Next question was then, why can't an accurate plan or timeline be published on the website? I pretty much went through this in the presentation, and as we get closer, we will give a more granular level that's in there. The real key in the learning, if you like, that we had from the previous DSSB programme was that the supplier had a lot of fluidity in when they could deliver premises within that. It was pretty much a numbers game, whereas now the contract is very much at individual property level, albeit that properties are all delivered as part of phases, which includes neighbouring properties. And so BT report to us literally a property level as they progress towards full delivery against that. So that's why we'll give that more granular information as we get closer to the actual build itself. The final point was around any potential grant scheme to make broadband services more affordable. There's a specific reference to some of the charges that EE are charging for their 4G products. It tends to be if you're going for some of the higher rated products where you'll get, in terms of 4G, it tends to be higher data limits that will cost more money. So the response that I've kind of given on there is that the programme itself is focused very much on the delivery of the infrastructure. From a state aid perspective, and I always promise myself I'm not going to mention state aid because it gets horrendously complex, and I've just gone and said it. But in short, state aid restricts what we're allowed to spend public funding on. So in terms of what we're doing here, it's we can spend public money on building the wholesale network that has the capability to deliver the services. So that's what we're doing. What we do with the voucher schemes is they've got to be able to provide, the suppliers must be able to provide a minimum 30 meg service at an affordable rate. Now that affordability is set effectively by UK government via its universal service obligation, and that affordable rate is £46.10 per month for that minimum 30 meg. What suppliers can do, of course, is offer you more enhanced packages that go above and beyond the minimum 30 meg connection rate, and they will potentially cost additional funds, but that then becomes consumer choice at that point. I know that there has been some initiatives, particularly through the pandemic, where there's been some schemes to give reduced costs, particularly for low-income families, for connectivity, and it's the mobile operators in particular that supported that, I have to say. And I know also that in some areas, although it doesn't appear to be particularly consistent, that those that are seeking kind of business grade services to help with their business, that there's some help through the likes of Business Gateway and the enterprise organisations. But as I say, it doesn't seem to be consistent across the country as to what they may or may not be able to provide as part of that. So I think that's covered those questions, Dave, but quite happy to pick up anything else.
I've just got three questions. I'd like to one comment and then a couple of questions, and then maybe open it up. So first of all, your explanation about the mobile operators then, and the £46 and 10 pence, I think it is, that most of the mobile operators effectively apply download limits rather than speed restrictions. So effectively, anyone can get a contract that gives them 30 megabits, but the Scottish Government is happy if that's a volume restricted contract, not an unlimited contract. Yeah,
the policy is very much on download speed. It's not on data limits.
That's fine. That's great. Obviously, Openreach then are one of the contractors then who can work with the main voucher and with the supplements from the UK government also. But that appears then to be a bit of a contradiction. Are they going to spend their subcontractor effort in responding to a voucher, or are they going to be building the main build? And obviously, there's some advantages, some pretty significant advantages having Openreach actually do the work, because you're not then constrained about what you can do in a year's time or 2 years' time or 3 years' time, because you're part of their wholesale delivery. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so I think, and apologies if I picked that up wrong, you're referring to Openreach can use the vouchers to build what they call their community fibre partnerships. Now, what Openreach, as you can probably imagine, is an enormous organisation. The way that they work, it is different bits of Openreach that manage the community fibre partnerships to what it is that are managing our contracts and other ones. It's also a different part of the organisation that does their commercial delivery. So the commercial delivery, for example, may have different subcontractors to what the R100 build has got, and it may be different subcontractors again that they then use to build their community fibre partnerships. I'll be honest, we've tried to encourage them to look at that a little bit more pragmatically to see where we can effectively provide better value for public money. Where we can start to see some, particularly if they're building in an area anyway as part of one programme, but there's some premises that are missing out, is there potential to then use some of their other initiatives to do the build at the same time. We do need to be really careful, of course, because if it's an area that's eligible for vouchers, then there's 63 suppliers that can get access to those vouchers. So we don't want to be seen to be favouring one supplier over another. But there's certainly something that we can do there. So we have been doing quite a bit of work with them. I know that one of the questions that you'd asked, Dave, in the email earlier is where we can see pockets of properties that have been connected from the main programme. The fibre then obviously will run along the road from one pocket to the next pocket, past a whole bunch of premises, but they don't appear to be serving those premises, which is massively frustrating if you live in a house and you see someone come along and dig fibre past your house, probably get a way leave off you to get across your driveway, and then don't offer you a connection anywhere. It's not unique to Aberdeenshire, I can assure you. It is something that we're trying to work with them on, again, to say, well, is this potentially something we can do within the bounds of the contract? Because it shouldn't cost very much money in reality if it's just a case of putting in an extra, what's called a CBT, which is a little bit of infrastructure on top of a pole or in an underground duct in order that we can serve more properties. So it is something that we're exploring with them. It's probably fair to say we don't have the full solution at the moment yet, to provide commitment as to what we will do, but we'll always look to see what we can maximise in terms of the build from the contract itself. But until such times as we get anything confirmed, those properties will always remain eligible for the main voucher as well.
Final question from me then is that a number of people in the local area then have tried satellite services over the past 4 or 5 years. And I guess largely then they've been found to be inadequate then, that people have not stayed with the satellites that they've had previously. Obviously there's a new generation of low orbit satellites, and Starlink being one and OneWeb being another, but I don't think they're included as part of any of the current plans.
No, that's correct. So you're right in that I've been probably working with different satellite schemes since about 2008, I think it was, and it's Hopefully there's no satellite operators in the room just now, but it's probably fair to say that satellite is generally always seen as the technology of last resort. It can give the download speeds. Things have changed quite significantly over the last few years. The biggest change is that companies like Eutelsat actually have a satellite above Northern Europe now. It used to be that most of the satellites pretty much sat over the equator. Effectively the throughput was affected because of that, but we've got satellites that are in effect more above us rather than on the horizon. So the throughput is better. I mean, they're selling services up to 100 meg download now across those satellites. So they very much can deliver the 30 meg connection within the financial limit that's there. The biggest challenge with satellite is you're always going to have that latency issue. Effectively, you're bouncing your signal off the moon twice for everything that you want to do. So that obviously takes a bit of time because it's quite far to go. That is always going to be an issue, but it is there. It does meet the policy commitment. You're quite right as well, and there is a staggering amount of money being spent on satellite technologies right now. You mentioned a couple of them. So we've got probably 4 key developments on the go just now at both low and mid-Earth orbit satellites. I tend not to talk about them too much because, as you say rightly, they're not available yet. The low Earth orbit ones, Starlink's probably one of the most famous ones. Those that don't know, that's owned by SpaceX, which is part of the Elon Musk world. The other one, which is low Earth orbit, is called Kuiper, which you may have heard of. So Kuiper is in the main funded by Amazon. Again, lots of money going into that, as you can probably imagine. It's probably fair to say that Starlink, although they're looking to cover the whole world, they're starting off in North America. Kuiper seems to be trying to target Africa first in terms of what they're doing. But Telesat and OneWeb, they're more mid-Earth orbit developments. OneWeb, you might be aware of, it kind of went bust a year or 2 ago, and it was bailed out by UK government, who I think now own about 50% of it. So you could say that we own half of that company now. So we're seeing developments coming forward from them, but they're not available just yet. Starlink does now cover the southern part of Scotland, but not quite as far as Aberdeenshire yet. It's not really gone commercial yet because it's still very much in development, and because it's not really commercial at this stage, it's all about early adopter, so it's about 90 quid a month. So again, doesn't fall within the remit of what we've got as our affordability criteria. Once they've got more constellation up there, and I understand that the whole of Scotland will be covered hopefully by the end of next spring, I would expect to see those prices start to come down, but ultimately it's up to Starlink how much they charge for that. And I guess the one thing I can probably tell you is that we are in conversation with all of these organisations to try and understand if it is something that can help Scotland at some point in the future. It may not be something that can fall in line, as I say, with the voucher schemes as we have them just now, but it's certainly something that we're keeping a very close eye on, and we've got a good relationship with some of these companies just now. Some more than others, I have to say, but we do have a good relationship with them to try and understand their developments and where it might go in the future. And obviously, if we get to a point where it's something that we think will be beneficial, we can bring it forward at that point.
I'm all done then, Simon. Thank you.
Well, let's throw the discussion open, David, you want to speak. You're muted. You're muted. Yeah, there you are.
I had a couple of questions about the main voucher scheme. If, as I understand it, some households are excluded from the main scheme on the grounds that the contractor doing most of the work did not find them an attractive prospect. So what makes them then an attractive prospect to another contractor when we attempt to pay by vouchers? That was one question, and the other, the others on the subject of aggregating, our efforts using vouchers. It seems to me to make no economic sense for a lot of people individuals holding vouchers to organise their own, the engineering themselves. It makes complete sense for it to be aggregated. Who holds the information about, about which households can aggregate to do this? I mean, we don't as individuals know all the relevant households. So how do we go about taking our voucher and asking for group action on this?
So I think in answer to your first question, if Openreach under the main contract have decided not to go to a property, why do we think that someone else will go there? So I guess it's based on what Openreach have done is they've tried to comply with what our tender requirements were, which was to maximise the coverage whilst adhering to our kind of mandated areas that we had within there, and a few other criteria that they had to comply with, and then work out how many properties they thought that they could build to as a result of that. It was never going to be all the properties, so there are some that will miss out. In terms then of how we think we can get that connection, it's because it's £5,000 per property. £5,000 can buy you quite a lot. It can certainly buy you enough to meet what the policy target is, and the policy target is, as I say, a 30 megabits per second minimum download speed via any technology. And we're confident that we can deliver that to every property in Scotland using the suppliers that we've got under the scheme. In terms of the aggregation piece, I mentioned that it's predominantly designed to be a supplier-led initiative, where the suppliers themselves, once they're registered, they get details on every single property in Scotland that is eligible for main vouchers, and every single property is eligible for an interim voucher. So they know where they are, they can download that information. A lot of the companies have got pretty detailed planning software of their own, which they can plug in. What we find is they'll sometimes go to an area where they might have a cluster of, say, 30 premises. There might only be 15 of them that are actually eligible for a main voucher. There might be a few that are available for an interim voucher. But what they can do is they can aggregate that whole build together, and they can work out what is the minimum number of people they need to sign up. So in order to get access to the voucher money, they need the actual property holder to sign up to the scheme, and by signing up to the scheme, you're also committing to a kind of minimum 1-year contract with that supplier. So often, if they'll go into an area, they won't necessarily get 100% take up, but they might not need 100% take up in order to make sure they've got enough funding coming through the vouchers to build the network that's in there. And beyond that, the suppliers doing that themselves, we also make that information available to all the local authorities. So both Aberdeen City and Shire have got access to that data as well. And Jack mentioned earlier that his team, one of the roles that they're going to look at is to try and see how they can help with that aggregation, working directly with the suppliers that we've got in the scheme as well, and actual access to that information. So hopefully that will certainly help. I think Jack, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, Duncan, thanks. So that's exactly, David, where essentially myself and my colleagues will be working. I'll put my contact details in the chat shortly so you can reach out directly right away if you want to. And essentially we'll have a landing page on the council's website, which is just in the process of getting made up. But like Duncan says, we've got access to that information to see where the kind of clusters, if you like, are, or the voucher schemes, so we can really kind of maximise that aggregation piece. So if it is a case of you're on the voucher scheme and you want to have an idea of who roundabout you has that, but you don't want to go to an operator just yet, by all means, I would say reach out to myself or my colleagues once they're in post next week, and we'll give you that kind of information and tell you if there is, a number of interim vouchers or main vouchers around you, and we can also discuss the local suppliers that can offer different solutions to you, because we've got a good idea of the coverage of that now. So I'll stick my details in the chat and feel free to reach out.
Okay, David, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you. Just one other point then. If it's left again to a contractor to decide which of the households holding vouchers will form an aggregate, the ones they choose not to include in the aggregate, what happens to them? They just they soldier on their own, do they? Because it doesn't seem to make sense, does it, to have this engineering work done and some households left out?
I mean, ultimately, there'll be, I guess there's two aspects to that. One is there'll be some householders that don't actually want a connection, so they won't be interested in pursuing a voucher. And I guess the other side of that coin is where we've got properties who do very much want to take part, but they might be too far away from anywhere else to actually aggregate. And what is the solution? And it is almost what is the solution of last resort that you've got to get into those hard to reach places, and that really comes down to our kind of satellite solutions that we've got in place.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else got a question?
I got a question.
Yes.
This is Willem. Can you just clarify BT versus BT OpenReach? So who did you actually sign the contract with?
So the contract is with BT Group.
BT Group.
Yeah.
Okay.
And OpenReach are a wholly owned subsidiary of BT Group.
Right. Okay. So I got an example, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be the only example across Scotland where I've been trying to. I've tried everything to get connectivity, and I've been talking. I actually been pursued by BT for a year and a half now, where first of all, they can provide me the service if I pay £20,000 up front, and then £600 a month. Yeah. So how does that work now? If I say I don't want to wait till worst scenario 2026, I do something. Yeah. So I'll pay the infrastructure cost myself. Would BT then come back to you and says, here's another tick in the box where we provided infrastructure, and sort of then double dip?
No, so if I guess if you want to pay for your own connection, that's fine. That's absolutely your prerogative, and I guess it's similar to the fact that so we created an intervention area based on where commercial operators said they were going, or more to the point where they weren't going to go. But since we've signed the contracts, we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of commercial build that's happening. Whilst the majority of it is in the urban areas, we have got some providers that are going beyond the urban areas. So we've got some big operators, Virgin Media really pushing out their network, OpenReach themselves are extending their network. We've got a new company that started building now across some parts of rural Scotland called Axion, who've got huge experience building rural networks in France that are now building in Scotland. City Fibre, despite the name, are now building out with the cities, which is great to see. But we've got lots of smaller operators as well, companies called Broadway Partners, Borderlink, and Canadian Broadband, who were traditionally fixed wireless operators. They are now delivering full fibre into a lot of rural areas. So we are seeing much increase in build. So what happens if a commercial operator comes to me and says, okay, Duncan, we've now decided that we're going to build a big network in this area here. Here's our commitment. Here's where the finance is to allow us to do it. This is our timescales. We'll carry out an impact assessment on the contract itself to try and understand what that means, because there's no point us spending public money to build connections to properties that a commercial operator is going to build to. But the kind of caveat to that is we need to look at the impact on the overall contract. So for example, if a small operator comes in and says we're doing 10 properties in this area here, and we do an impact assessment that shows, well, actually, if we take those 10 properties out, it makes that whole section of the network unviable at that point because of the financial return. We might choose not to de-scope those premises from a cost perspective, but we do need to look at it on an individual basis. But the other thing that we also do as part of the survey stage is that BT will often survey properties and come back and say, actually, we've surveyed it and it turns out that this property can already order a service. Quite often from BT themselves. Not suggesting they don't know where they build their network, but it does happen. So we're always taking account of that, and one of our kind of prime drivers, as you can probably imagine, is to try and ensure value for money. It's a lot of money that we're spending, but it's all public money, so we need to be accountable for every penny.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? David again. Yes, you're muted again.
Muted.
David, you're muted.
Can you tell us, Duncan, what the process is, the practical process from our point of view, Now, as those of us who will be main voucher holders, will be notified formally about that, will we? And then, and thereafter, we approach Jack for some advice about forming aggregates.
Yeah, so really the first port of call is to the website to try and understand what your eligibility is. If you're eligible for a voucher, I mean, we're not at this stage proactively writing out to people. There was a postcard drop kind of pre-last election for some of the interim voucher stuff, but we've got no plans to repeat that at this stage, I don't think. But the website will tell you what effectively you're eligible for. If it says you're eligible for the main voucher, there's then further information on there. There's a kind of user journey document, for example, that you can access, and it talks through what your options are and how you can follow the process. The process itself is, I'll be honest, it's not particularly simple. It is fairly complex, and it's one of the things that we've been trying to improve in the back office, is to try and make that process as simple as we possibly can. A lot of the time we are relying on what the operators themselves can offer as well. But certainly from a user perspective, that's a route that you could pursue. From Jack's perspective, obviously he'll be proactively looking to see whether specific clusters and things which would be suitable for aggregation. And I'm sure that Jack would be quite happy for you to contact him. I see he shared his email address, for example, if you've got any concerns around kind of aggregation in any particular area.
Just to make sure I've understood that right, as individual households, we go on the website, find out what our eligibility is, and make an application then for, in the case of some of us, for a voucher.
So the actual voucher application process, the suppliers themselves will take care of all of that. But what it will do is it will take you through the channels that you've got where you can start approaching suppliers that are on that supplier list that may be interested in actually working with you. And as Jack said earlier, one of the things that he's doing is actually working with these operators so he can understand, well, which ones really are interested in building in Aberdeenshire and in which areas. So he'll certainly be able to help out with that.
I think I understand, yeah.
Maybe you'll have to get into conclave with Jack pretty fast, I think, before the voucher schemes run out. Does anybody else have any points? I've got a question, which I hope hasn't been covered. Is there any possibility that the 2026 date may be brought forward, or a possibility that it may be extended? I mean, how firmly set in stone is it?
So, I mean, that's certainly the current projection that we've got, an implementation plan from BT. I guess one of the things that we do against the implementation plan is make sure that they deliver on time where we possibly can throughout everything. If they can accelerate build, and it's fair to say that from political perspective, we've changed Minister's responsibility for digital connectivity. Actually, we've got a cabinet secretary now, so Miss Forbes is our cabinet secretary with responsibility now for the delivery of the programme. She's been quite forthright, I would say, with senior management within BT that she expects that they will accelerate delivery. Whether that proves to be the case or not remains to be seen. I mean, we are in the very early stages of deployment across the North lot. As I mentioned earlier, we are seeing some live premises coming through already, but actually within the contract, we're not due anything until spring next year. So it started off good. I'll reserve judgment until we get to the end of this phase to see if the whole phase has been delivered ahead of time or not. But it's, yeah, they've made a good start, and we'll certainly keep working on it to try and improve that. If we can accelerate it, again, what we'll do is we'll reflect that in the website. The website's actually updated every fortnight. If we get any data changes through, we're updating them on there. The website itself accesses, we've got obviously a database that sits in the back office, and it's a single database with all our information in the one place. So the website always accesses the most up-to-date information. The mapping software that Jack's got access to accesses that same information as well. And it means that we're keeping as up to date as we possibly can. And the suppliers as well, of course, they've got their information updated on a fortnightly basis. But yeah, we are certainly working behind the scenes to see if we can accelerate the programme. That's right across the country, as you can probably imagine, and we'll continue to do that.
And how will we know that the work in our area has started? I mean, apart from seeing OpenReach people up, telegraph poles and things, do we have to log on to the website, or will people be telling us what's coming up so we can make eventual arrangements with ISPs?
I mean, literally, the easiest way to see progress it will be when you start seeing people turning up in vans and walking about with clipboards, because that means they'll be at the survey stage at that point. You'll see them coming there. What they'll then be doing is, because it's a full fibre infrastructure, it means that we're obviously building infrastructure much closer to everyone's property. We don't physically connect every property. It's the wholesale network that gets built. The final connection comes when you order a service, which is when the final piece goes in. But there's many more way leaves that are required across the contracts because it's all full fibre. So you'll probably find there'll be knocks on doors and things for certain people where BT might have to cross your land, and they'll be looking for way leaves and such like. And then they come and knock on my door if they can't get agreement from any individuals at that point. And that's often when I then come and speak to the community council and say, please, can you help us? So you probably get a bit of noise around that time, and you'll physically see them building. I mean, what we do try and encourage the engineers to do is, as they're building, is that they can drop postcards in at that point to effectively say, okay, we're in the area, we're building this network, it's part of the Scottish Government's programme, we expect it to go live, and they'll give a time scale at that time. So that's certainly something that we're proactively trying to do to get the engineers to give you that information. We do, unfortunately, get stories almost every week where I'll get an inquiry from a member of the public who tells me that they've spoken to an engineer on the street that have told them something which flies in the face of everything that we've told them, and it doesn't matter how many times we look at it in detail, we'll get the truth out, but there does seem to be a lot of over the fence chats that take place, and maybe things that are maybe misunderstood, shall we say. But I guess because you've now got this contact with me, I'm more than happy to provide updates to the community council, and I'm more than happy for you guys to contact me directly as well. My contact details are on the presentation that was recorded earlier, so I'm happy to do that, to help walk you through it. What we'll do is I tend to send out kind of quarterly project updates, so I'll make sure that the community council is added onto the circulation list for those updates as well, just to try and keep these up to speed as we can on progress.
And we'll pass them on to everybody who's interested, of course. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have a point to make a question to ask?
Yeah, just one for clarification. I picked up during your presentation that you were saying is that the machines were putting, one of the first pictures that you saw, they were putting copper in the ground. But you're also talking about full fibre delivery. So is it full fibre, or is it is still done over copper?
No, there's no copper at all. Apologies.
Oh, okay.
if I gave that impression. Yeah, there's no copper. Okay. It's all full fibre.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Anybody else got any questions, thoughts? Well, no. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Duncan, for making so much clear. And it's very good to establish the direct contact with you. And I do hope your cold gets better soon.
Thank you.
And thanks to Matt and Jack, and no doubt we'll be seeing more of you and your colleagues as the months go by. And special thanks to Dave Ellis for organising this and ensuring that we're in the picture. So thank you very much. I think it's time to say good night. Dave, the recording will be posted somewhere.
I'll look at what the options of sharing that are then, yes, with the ones who attended the meeting and those who said they want to see the recording, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think I'll close the meeting now, and good night.
Thank you all.
Everyone,
Cheers.
bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.